Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins not with a scream, but with a toast. A gathering of friends. A silver cup passed from hand to hand, and by morning, one of them was dead. The police called it poison. But Hercule Poirot saw something far more unsettling. A dinner filled with unspoken tension, glances that lingered too long, and a silence that spoke louder than any confession. In a world of high society, words can deceive, but silence? Silence can kill. Stay with us till the end. And if you enjoy stories where every quiet moment hides a secret, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The Ink of Deception. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell over London like a curtain drawn between truth and illusion, blurring every reflection on the glass. From the corner window of Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat with his hands folded neatly on his lap, his gaze fixed upon the gray world outside. The steady rhythm of rain pleased him. Order and chaos, as he often said. But that morning, the calm was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door, brisk, nervous, and uncertain all at once. Miss Lemon, ever precise and punctual, looked up from her typewriter. "A young lady, sir. She says it's urgent." Poirot turned, one eyebrow lifting. "Then let us not make urgency wait. Show her in, Miss Lemon." A moment later, a woman entered, young, pale, and visibly shaken. Her hands clutched a small leather-bound diary against her chest, as though it were a fragile life in danger. "Mr. Poirot," she began, her voice trembling. "My name is Eleanor Gray. I need your help." Poirot gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, mademoiselle, sit. Tell me what has brought such fear to your eyes." She sat down carefully, still holding the diary. "It's this," she said, placing it on his desk. "It belonged to my sister, Margaret. She died 2 weeks ago. The police said it was suicide, but I know she didn't take her own life." Poirot's fingers brushed the diary's worn cover. "And this book, you believe it holds the truth?" Eleanor nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, but something is wrong with it. The entries, they don't sound like her. It's as if someone else wrote them." Poirot leaned back, studying her face. "You think the diary has been altered?" "I don't think," she whispered. "I know." He opened the diary with delicate precision. The handwriting was neat, too neat. Each line perfectly formed, every margin measured. Poirot could see immediately that it lacked something human. No tremor, no hesitation. "It is curious," he murmured. "When the heart speaks, the hand trembles. But here, the hand has not trembled once." Eleanor watched him anxiously. "The last few pages talk about despair, about regret, about wanting to die. But Margaret was happy, Mr. Poirot. She was engaged. She was planning her wedding." Poirot turned the pages slowly, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He paused on the final entry. "I cannot bear it any longer. The truth will destroy him, and I cannot let that happen. Forgive me." Poirot read it twice, then closed the book. "Who is him?" "My sister's fiancé," Eleanor replied. "Charles Dunning. A banker. Everyone adored him. He's been very kind since her death." Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. "Kindness, Miss Gray, can be a mask, as smooth and deceptive as the ink upon this page." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You believe me, then?" "I believe nothing yet," Poirot said calmly. "But I will discover if this diary tells the truth or if it lies in silence." He stood, reaching for his coat. "Miss Lemon, make inquiries. I wish to know everything about Miss Margaret Gray, her life, her habits, and this Mr. Dunning." "Of course, sir," Miss Lemon replied, already typing. Eleanor hesitated. "Mr. Poirot, if someone did this, if someone forged her diary, what kind of person would do such a thing?" Poirot looked at her gravely. "Someone who understands that words, once written, can live longer than the person who wrote them. That afternoon, Poirot visited the Gray home on Kensington Road. The house stood quiet and immaculate, too immaculate, as if grief had been tidied away along with the flowers. Eleanor led him upstairs to her sister's room. It was a place frozen in time. Perfume bottles still lined the vanity. A wedding dress hung half-finished in the corner, its lace ghostly in the dim light. Poirot walked slowly, eyes scanning the smallest details. A smudge of ink on the carpet, a photo frame turned face down on the nightstand. "Why is this picture hidden?" he asked. Eleanor looked startled. "I didn't even notice that." Poirot turned the frame over. The photo showed Margaret with a man who was not Charles Dunning. A dark-haired man, smiling, his arm around her shoulders. Eleanor's breath caught. That's David. He was her colleague at the publishing firm. They were friends, nothing more. Poirot examined the photo again. A curious friendship. There is affection in the eyes, and perhaps regret. He replaced the frame carefully, then moved to the desk where Margaret's stationery lay. He picked up a pen. "You say your sister often wrote letters. Did she ever write in this hand? So perfect, so mechanical?" "No," Eleanor said softly. Her handwriting was rounder, warmer. You could tell her mood by the way she wrote. Poirot nodded slowly. "Then I think, Miss Gray, we have our first lie." Later that evening, Poirot sat in his armchair, the diary open beside him. On the table lay several sheets of Margaret's authentic letters, borrowed from Eleanor. The comparison was damning. The loops of her true handwriting were lively, impulsive. The diary, by contrast, was cold and deliberate. He studied the ink under his lamp. One shade glistened faintly, newer than the rest. Poirot smiled faintly. Someone has rewritten the past, and poorly at that. A soft knock came at his door. Hastings entered, cheerful as ever. "Evening. Old chap, Miss Lemon, said you were working on something new." Poirot looked up. "Indeed, Hastings. A diary that speaks too neatly for a heart in torment. Forgery, perhaps, but what interests me more is motive. Why would someone forge the words of the dead?" Hastings frowned. "Maybe to protect someone? Or to condemn," Poirot said quietly. He closed the diary and looked out the window at the storm still raging beyond. "Hastings, we go tomorrow to meet Mr. Charles Dunning." The following morning, they arrived at Dunning's townhouse in Mayfair. Charles Dunning greeted them warmly, a tall, handsome man with eyes that never quite matched his smile. "Mr. Poirot, it's an honor. I've heard of your cases. Eleanor told me you were helping her, though, I admit, I wish she'd let the matter rest. Poor Margaret wouldn't want this continued." Poirot's gaze was steady. "And yet, Monsieur Dunning, forgive me, Mr. Dunning, truth does not rest until it is found." Dunning's expression flickered. "Of course. Ask anything you like." Poirot's eyes swept the elegant room. "You and Miss Gray were engaged. Were there any disagreements?" "None at all," Dunning said smoothly. "Margaret was gentle, kind, but she was easily influenced. She had a friend, David Hillman, who filled her head with nonsense about me. He resented our engagement." Poirot nodded slightly. "And yet, Miss Gray continued her friendship with him." "I didn't forbid it," Dunning said quickly. "I trusted her." Poirot smiled faintly. "Trust is a beautiful word, Mr. Dunning, but sometimes the one who speaks of it most loudly is the one who has least of it." For the first time, Dunning's composure cracked. "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Poirot?" "Not yet," Poirot replied gently. "But tell me, on the day Miss Gray died, where were you?" "At my club," Dunning said. "From 6 until midnight. Many people saw me." Poirot inclined his head. "Of course. You must forgive me. I am a man who trusts, but also verifies." As they left the house, Hastings whispered, "He seemed confident enough." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Confidence can be a costume, Hastings. But I saw something else, fear hidden beneath charm. A man who rehearses his innocence is often rehearsing a lie. That evening, Poirot returned to his flat and took the diary once more. He laid a magnifying glass over the pages, tracing faint impressions beneath the ink, indentations left by a heavy hand. Someone had written forcefully, pressing through the paper. He rubbed the page lightly with a soft pencil, revealing a ghostly outline of previous writing. The words were faint but visible. He said he would ruin him if I spoke. I can't. Poirot stopped. The rest was torn away. He sat back slowly, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. So, there's another truth beneath the false one. The diary lies, but even lies leave shadows. He turned to Miss Lemon. Tomorrow, find out where Mr. Dunning was between 5 and 6 on the night Miss Gray died. His alibi begins at 6. I wish to see what lies just before it. Yes, sir. Poirot then wrote a note. And also, locate Mr. David Hillman, the friend from the publishing firm. He may hold the missing half of this page. The next morning, Poirot and Hastings met David Hillman at a modest cafe near Fleet Street. He was a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers, a writer by trade and by heart. I knew Margaret well, David said quietly. She was kind, but she got mixed up with Charles Dunning. Everyone thought he was charming, but there was something wrong about him. What kind of wrong? Poirot asked. Controlling. Subtle. He made her doubt herself. When she tried to break the engagement, he threatened her. Said he'd destroy my career if she left him. Hastings looked shocked. Good heavens. David looked down. I told her to go to the police. She said she'd write everything in her diary, that if anything happened to her, the truth would be there. Poirot nodded slowly. Then someone made sure the diary told a different story. David's eyes filled with grief. You mean he forged it? Poirot didn't answer. He simply said, Tell me, Mr. Hillman, did she ever show you the diary? Yes. She wrote it in blue ink, always blue. She hated black ink. Said it reminded her of death. Poirot smiled faintly. Then, Mr. Hillman, I think you have just given me the key to the lie. That night, Poirot sat before the diary one last time. Under the bright light, he compared the pages. The earlier entries, all blue. The final ones, black. He nodded to himself. Margaret Gray did not write her own farewell. The hand that wrote her death wrote it in black. He closed the diary, his mind clear as the rain finally ceased outside. Tomorrow, he murmured, we invite Mr. Dunning for tea. It is time for truth to write its final chapter. Poirot extinguished the lamp and stood in silence, the city beyond his window, now still, as if the storm itself waited for what was to come. Chapter 2. The Voices Between the Lines. The next morning dawned cold and windless, the kind of London morning that seems to wait for something to happen. Hercule Poirot stood at his window, watching the light break through the clouds. In his hand, he held the diary once more, that small book of lies that whispered louder than truth itself. He placed it on the table and turned toward Miss Lemon, who was already typing her report. Well, Miss Lemon, he said, what did our inquiries discover about Mr. Dunning? Quite a bit, sir, she replied, handing him a neat folder. He's been with the Royal Bank for 10 years. Respected, though not well liked. Very private. No family. And as you suspected, his alibi on the night Miss Gray died has a gap. Poirot looked up sharply. Go on. He was seen leaving his office at 5:30. The porter says he drove away alone. His club record shows he arrived there at 6 sharp. But the distance from his office to the club is only a 10-minute drive. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A gap of 20 minutes, then. 20 minutes in which one may do much, including murder. Miss Lemon hesitated. Also, sir, a curious note from the cleaner at the bank. She says Mr. Dunning's desk had a broken pen and several sheets of blotting paper missing that week. Poirot smiled slightly. Ah, broken pen, missing blotting paper. These are not details. These are confessions written without words. He reached for his hat. "Come, Miss Lemon. I think it is time we speak again with Mr. Dunning, but this time not in his elegant drawing room." They found Charles Dunning at his office, standing before a large window overlooking the city. He greeted them with polite surprise, though his eyes betrayed irritation. "Mr. Poirot, I wasn't expecting you here." Poirot smiled. An investigator must sometimes appear unannounced, to catch truth before it is time to disguise itself. Dunning's smile faltered. "I've already told you everything." "Indeed, but I have come not for what you said, but for what you wrote." Poirot laid the diary on the desk. Dunning's gaze flickered toward it, then away. "Ah, yes, that dreadful thing. Poor Margaret's last words." Poirot's voice was gentle. "You are certain they are hers?" "Of course," Dunning said quickly. "Who else could have written them?" Poirot tilted his head. A question, indeed. "For there are two inks in this diary, Mr. Dunning, blue and black. You knew she always wrote in blue, did you not?" Dunning's hands tensed. "I can't say I remember." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And yet you gave her that very blue pen for her birthday 3 months ago. You see, I make it my business to know what others forget." For a moment, silence filled the office. Dunning's jaw tightened. "What are you implying?" "That someone used black ink to rewrite her farewell," Poirot said softly. "Someone with a reason to make her death appear self-inflicted." Dunning's composure cracked, just for an instant. Then he laughed, forcing calm. "You have a vivid imagination, Mr. Poirot." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Imagination, perhaps, but imagination guided by facts." He glanced around the room. "May I?" Without waiting for permission, Poirot stepped toward Dunning's desk. On it lay a blotter, freshly used. He lifted the top sheet carefully. The faint reverse of a written word appeared. "Forgive." Poirot held it to the light. "Forgive me." The same phrase that ends the diary. Dunning's face went pale. Poirot placed the blotter down. "You see, ink is a dangerous witness, Mr. Dunning. It remembers what you wish forgotten." He turned to leave. "Good day. We shall meet again soon." As the door closed behind them, Hastings whispered, "That man's guilty as sin, Poirot." Poirot shook his head. "Not yet proven. He is guilty of deceit, but murder requires proof that cannot be wiped away like ink." Later that afternoon, Poirot visited the laboratory of an old acquaintance, a man skilled in the art of ink analysis. He handed over the diary and the blotter sample. "Can you tell me," Poirot asked, "if this ink is the same?" The man examined the samples carefully under his instruments. "Yes," he said after a while. "Same brand, same formulation, and not commercially available. It's a custom ink. Only a few offices order it in bulk." "Such as?" Poirot asked. "The Royal Bank," the man replied. Poirot smiled. "Merci." He stopped himself, then corrected. "Thank you, my friend. That is most enlightening." He walked away into the London dusk, his mind quietly assembling the pieces. A diary written in custom black ink. A banker with a missing 20 minutes. A love triangle ending in death. The pattern was forming, yet something still eluded him. He turned the corner toward Whitehaven Mansions and froze. A shadow moved near his door. Poirot stepped closer, silent as the rain that had begun again. A man stood there, holding something in his hand, a piece of paper. When he saw Poirot, he startled, dropped it, and fled into the street. Poirot knelt, picking up the paper. It was a torn diary page. He read the words. He said he would ruin them both if I spoke. I can't let him destroy David. He doesn't deserve this. Poirot folded the page carefully and entered his flat. "So," he murmured, "Margaret tried to protect the man she loved and paid for it with her life." That night, Poirot sat alone by the fire, his mind restless. The diary had lied, but the torn page had spoken truth. Still, one question remained. Who had placed that page at his door? Eleanor Gray? David Hillman? Or someone trying to mislead him? He glanced toward the window where raindrops traced crooked lines of silver. "The liar always returns to the scene of his lie," he said softly. "We shall see who returns next." The following day, Eleanor Gray came to see him again. She looked exhausted, sleepless, pale, her eyes red from crying. "Mr. Poirot, something terrible has happened," she said. "What is it, Miss Gray?" "David Hillman is missing." Poirot's expression did not change. "Since when?" "Since last night. He was supposed to meet me this morning, but his landlady says he never came home." Poirot folded his hands. "Ah, and tell me, who else knew he was to meet you?" Eleanor hesitated. "Charles. He came by yesterday to check on me." "I mentioned it." Poirot nodded. "Then I think we must pay another visit to Mr. Dunning. Quickly." They arrived at Dunning's townhouse in the late afternoon. This time, he did not answer the door himself. A butler appeared, pale and anxious. "I'm sorry, sir," the man said. "Mr. Dunning isn't receiving visitors." Poirot's tone was calm but firm. "You will tell him that Mr. Poirot insists." Moments later, Dunning appeared, his tie undone, eyes bloodshot. "What now? Haven't you hounded me enough?" Poirot stepped forward. "Mr. Dunning, Mr. David Hillman is missing." Dunning stiffened. "I wouldn't know anything about that." "No." Poirot's voice was silk over steel. "Yet his name appears on a torn page found outside my door last night. A page written in your ink." Dunning's lips trembled. "You're accusing me again. You have no proof." Poirot smiled faintly. "Proof is like smoke, Mr. Dunning. It clings to everything it touches. Even to you." He turned to Eleanor. "Miss Gray, perhaps you will wait outside. I must speak to Mr. Dunning privately." Eleanor hesitated but obeyed. The moment she was gone, Poirot lowered his voice. "You forged the diary to protect yourself. But in doing so, you revealed what you feared most, discovery." Dunning's fists clenched. "You can't prove a thing." Poirot leaned closer. "I do not need to prove it yet. I only need to make you nervous. Nervous men make mistakes." He left the house without another word. That evening, Hastings joined Poirot again at the flat. "You think Dunning will slip up?" "He already has," Poirot said. "He forgot the simplest thing, ink stains." "Stains?" Poirot nodded toward the diary. The blotter in his office revealed the words, "Forgive me." The same phrase ends the diary. He copied her words to make his version seem real, but the real letter she wrote that night still exists. Hastings blinked. "A letter?" "Yes, the one she wrote to David Hillman before she died. It was never sent. The torn page proves it. She wrote of fear, of protection, of a man who threatened them both. That man could only be Dunning." Hastings frowned. "But where's the letter now?" Poirot smiled. "That, my dear Hastings, is the mystery of the next hour." When night fell, Poirot and Hastings returned to Margaret Gray's bedroom. The room remained untouched since her death, except for one detail. The ink stain Poirot had noticed before seemed larger now. He knelt beside the desk, fingers tracing the wood. "Yes, there is something beneath this drawer." He pulled it free. Beneath it, wedged against the back panel, was an envelope sealed with blue wax. Poirot lifted it reverently. The handwriting was round and warm, unmistakably Margaret's. He broke the seal. "My dearest Eleanor, if anything happens to me, you must know the truth. Charles found out about David. He said he would ruin us both, that he would make it look as though I had lost my mind. He has already taken my diary. I fear what he will do with it. Please, forgive me if I cannot fight him any longer. Margaret." Hastings exhaled slowly. "That's it, Poirot. That's everything." Poirot nodded. "Yes, the true voice of the dead. The diary lied, but the letter speaks." He stood, his eyes dark with resolve. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we shall end this." The next day, Poirot invited Charles Dunning to tea. Dunning arrived, looking composed but wary. Eleanor was there too, her hands trembling as she poured tea into delicate china cups. Poirot spoke pleasantly. "Mr. Dunning, I thank you for coming. I wished only to clarify one final matter. You see, we have located another piece of Miss Gray's writing." Dunning froze mid-sip. Poirot continued, his tone even. "A letter, sealed and hidden. In it, she speaks of her fear, of your threats, of your forgery." Dunning's hand shook. "You have no right." Poirot's voice cut through the air. "You killed her, Mr. Dunning. She tried to break free, and you silenced her, not with violence, but with deceit. You made her death appear as despair. You killed her reputation, her truth, her name." Dunning stood suddenly, knocking over his cup. Tea spilled across the table like spreading blood. "You can't prove I—" Poirot rose calmly. "On the contrary, we can. The letter bears your fingerprints and the ink from your office. Scotland Yard will confirm it." Dunning's mask shattered. His face twisted with fury and fear. "She betrayed me. I only wanted to protect what was mine." Poirot's gaze was merciless. "And yet in protecting yourself, you destroyed her." For a long, suffocating moment, no one spoke. Then Dunning sank into his chair, his hands trembling. "She said she'd ruin me. I couldn't let her. I just wanted her to stop." Poirot's eyes softened slightly. "You might have stopped with words, not lies." Outside, sirens wailed, drawing closer. As officers entered to take Dunning away, Eleanor turned to Poirot with tears in her eyes. "How did you know?" Poirot looked down at the diary. "Because, Miss Gray, lies speak loudly, but truth whispers. You only have to listen between the lines." He handed her the Real letter, folded carefully. "Keep this. It is your sister's voice, her true one. Let be heard." Eleanor took it with trembling hands. "Thank you." Poirot nodded once. "Grief can deceive us, but truth restores order, even in death." He turned toward the window, where sunlight finally pierced through the rain, scattering over the room like forgiveness written in light. Chapter 3. The Truth Beneath the Pages. The morning after Charles Dunning's arrest was quiet, too quiet for London. Outside Whitehaven Mansions, the rain had stopped at last, leaving the streets slick and silver, as though the city itself had been washed clean of lies. Hercule Poirot sat in his armchair, a cup of tea untouched beside him. The diary, now nothing more than a relic of deceit, lay closed on the table. Hastings sat opposite, his brow furrowed. "I must say, Poirot, this case felt different," he said. "There wasn't a trace of blood, no weapon, no struggle, only words." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, my friend, words can wound deeper than any knife." The diary was both weapon and witness. Miss Lemon entered, holding a telegram. "From Inspector Hall, sir. He says Dunning is refusing to speak. Claims the letter is a forgery." Poirot sighed quietly. "Ah, how predictable. A man who forges truth will always accuse others of doing the same." Hastings frowned. "So what now? We already proved he wrote those final diary entries. Isn't that enough?" Poirot looked at him thoughtfully. "Enough to reveal deceit, yes, but not enough to prove murder. The law requires more than logic. It demands proof beyond doubt. And at this moment, doubt is Dunning's only friend." He lifted the diary once more. "The answers, I think, still lie within these pages. There is something we have not yet seen." He turned to Miss Lemon. "Bring me the letter again, and the torn page that appeared at my door." Miss Lemon retrieved both, placing them beside the diary. Poirot opened the diary carefully to the middle, where a faint tear line remained. He set the loose fragment against it. The edges matched perfectly. "See, Hastings, this page was removed after Margaret wrote it, but before the ink dried. Someone tore it in haste." Hastings leaned closer. "Then she must have written it the night she died." "Precisely. But the question remains, who tore it out, Dunning or someone else?" Miss Lemon glanced up from her notes. "Could it be David Hillman?" After all, he disappeared before Dunning's arrest. Poirot smiled faintly. A wise observation. The one who disappears often fears being found guilty or fears something worse. That afternoon, Poirot and Hastings visited the police station where Charles Dunning was held. The banker sat in a small, gray room, his posture straight but his eyes hollow. Poirot regarded him calmly. "You claim the letter is false." Dunning's voice was low. "You're clever, Poirot, but even clever men can be deceived. I never wrote those words. That letter is a trap." Poirot studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "Perhaps. But if you did not write it, who did? The dead cannot forge their own voice." Dunning leaned forward. "David Hillman. He's the one you should be questioning. He wanted me ruined. He wanted Margaret all to himself." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, he is the one who vanished." Dunning smiled coldly. "Then perhaps he had a reason to run." Poirot stood, turning to leave. "You speak of reason, Mr. Dunning, but I think you confuse reason with excuse." As they walked out, Hastings said, "You don't believe him, do you?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, but I believe that even liars can tell fragments of truth. Perhaps David Hillman does hide something, though not what Dunning imagines." Later that evening, Poirot received a call from Inspector Hall. "Poirot," the inspector said, "we've found Hillman." "Alive, I trust?" Poirot asked. "Yes, but barely. He was attacked near the river. Someone tried to make it look like a robbery. He's at St. Mary's Hospital." Poirot's eyes darkened. Then the truth grows impatient. "Come, Hastings. It is time we hear the words of a man who almost joined the silence." At the hospital, they found David Hillman lying pale against the white sheets. His head was bandaged and his breathing shallow, but his eyes flickered open as Poirot approached. "Mr. Hillman," Poirot said softly, "I am here to help you. Tell me what happened." Hillman's voice was faint. "I was followed 2 nights ago. I thought it was just shadows until I reached the river. Then someone struck me. I never saw who." Poirot nodded. "Did you have something with you that night?" Hillman hesitated. "Yes. Margaret's real diary." Hastings's eyes widened. "The real one?" Hillman nodded weakly. "She kept 2. One at home, one hidden at work. She gave it to me the night before she died. Said if anything happened, I should bring it to the police. I was on my way to you, Poirot, when they came." Poirot's expression grew grave. "Where is it now?" Hillman closed his eyes. "Gone. Taken." Poirot turned to the inspector. "Then Dunning still has allies, or someone else who benefits from silence." Hillman's hand trembled. "Margaret didn't just write about him. There was something else. Something she discovered at the bank." Poirot leaned closer. "What did she discover?" But Hillman was fading fast. "She said the money wasn't just numbers. There were names." The words trailed off into unconsciousness. Poirot straightened slowly. "Names, money, a second diary, and a banker desperate to bury both. Hastings, this case is not only of love, it is of corruption." Back at his flat, Poirot laid out everything on the table. The false diary, the torn page, the letter, and his notes. Miss Lemon entered quietly with a cup of tea. "Sir," she said, "I've looked into Mr. Dunning's accounts. There are large transfers to private charities, but the charities don't exist." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "So, we arrive at the heart of it. Margaret Gray discovered her fiancé's fraud, and for that she died." He looked at the diary again. "But the real one, where could it be?" He tapped his fingers slowly. Then a memory flickered. Margaret's photograph. The frame turned face down in her room. He stood abruptly. "Miss Lemon, Hastings to Kensington Road. At once." They returned to the Gray residence after dark. Eleanor let them in, her face drawn with worry. "Has something happened?" she asked. Poirot said softly, "Perhaps something that has already happened, but not yet been seen." He went straight to Margaret's room. The photograph still rested on the vanity, face up now. Poirot lifted it carefully, feeling along the back. The cardboard was thicker than usual. He pressed one corner. It shifted slightly. Poirot smiled. Ah, the voice of the dead, hidden behind the smile of the living. He slid a thin knife beneath the backing and lifted it away. Inside, folded twice, was a small notebook, identical in size to the false diary, but older, its cover stained with ink. He opened it. Hastings leaned closer. "Is that?" "Yes," Poirot said quietly. "The true diary of Margaret Gray." The entries were raw and unguarded. They spoke of love and doubt, of fear and discovery. And then, near the end, a revelation. "I saw the documents today. Charles is moving money through false charities. He's destroying records. I told him I would expose him if he didn't stop. He said he would make the world think I was mad. If anything happens, look at the bank ledgers. They will tell the truth." Poirot closed the diary with care. So, she did not write her farewell in despair. She wrote it in defiance. And for that, she was silenced. Eleanor stared, tears welling in her eyes. "You mean he killed her because she found out?" Poirot's gaze softened. "Because she knew too much, and because she refused to be silent." The next morning, Poirot presented the diary to Inspector Hall. "Here," he said simply, "is your evidence." Hall turned the pages, whistling low. "Good grief. This ties Dunning directly to embezzlement and fraud." Poirot nodded. "Into motive for murder." Hall frowned. "But can we prove he actually killed her?" "The coroner's report still says suicide." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but that is where the diary again speaks. Look at this entry, dated the day before her death. He changed the locks on my door today. Said it was for my safety. I think he means to keep me in." Hall's eyes widened. "So she was trapped?" "Yes," Poirot said. "And if the door was locked from the outside, then suicide becomes impossible." The inspector slapped the file shut. "That's enough for me. We'll reopen the case." Poirot inclined his head. "And justice will, once again, write its own ending." That evening, Poirot sat alone at his desk, looking at both diaries, one true, one false. One written by love, the other by fear. He touched the cover of the genuine one gently. Hastings entered quietly. "You've solved it, old chap. Why do you look so sad?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because, Hastings, the truth is rarely without sorrow. Miss Gray sought justice, and she has it, but she paid for it with her life." He closed both diaries, placing them side by side. Yet in the end, her voice was not silenced. It merely waited for someone to listen. Hastings nodded slowly. "You always listen, Poirot." Poirot's eyes moved toward the window, where moonlight cast pale, silver lines across the floor. "It is my duty, for the dead cannot speak, unless one learns to read what lies beneath the pages." He looked again at the false diary, its perfect handwriting mocking the chaos it hid. "You see, Hastings, lies often dress themselves in perfection. Truth, however, is always slightly flawed. A trembling hand, a crooked line, a human heart." For a long time, neither man spoke. The ticking of the clock filled the silence, steady and certain. Poirot's eyes lingered on the two books, one dark, one light, until at last he whispered, "The diary lied, yes, but also confessed, not in words, but in its need to deceive." He stood, straightening his tie. "Tomorrow, I will visit Eleanor Gray. She deserves to hear her sister's truth, not the lie the world believed." The next day, Poirot arrived at the Gray home once more. Eleanor met him at the door, her expression wary yet hopeful. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked. Poirot nodded. "Yes, Miss Gray. I found your sister's true words. They clear her name." Eleanor's voice trembled. "And Charles will face trial for murder and for theft. His crimes are no longer hidden." She sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "She always told me the truth mattered. I thought it died with her. Poirot shook his head gently. Truth does not die, Miss Gray. It only waits, like ink beneath old pages, for the light to reveal it. Eleanor smiled through her tears. Thank you, Mr. Poirot, for listening when no one else would. Poirot inclined his head. It is I who must thank your sister for trusting that even a lie cannot live forever. He took one last look at the diary on the table, the true one, its ink now dry and safe. Then he turned toward the door. Outside, the wind carried the faintest whisper of turning pages, as though the city itself exhaled relief. For the first time in weeks, London felt clean again, and Hercule Poirot, walking through the clear morning air, knew that somewhere Margaret Gray's spirit finally rested, her truth written, her silence broken. Chapter 4. The Confession That Burned. The trial of Charles Dunning began on a cold morning in December. The courthouse loomed gray and solemn against the pale sky, its tall windows reflecting nothing but the color of truth, cold, sharp, and unforgiving. Inside, the air was thick with whispers. Reporters filled the benches. The name Margaret Gray had become a headline, a symbol of the scandal that had gripped London. A banker, accused of murdering his fiancée to hide financial crimes. It was the kind of tale the city fed upon. Poirot sat quietly in the gallery, his hat resting on his knees. Beside him, Hastings leaned forward, eyes fixed on the accused. Dunning looked smaller than before. His arrogance had thinned, leaving only a hollow man in a dark suit, his hands trembling as he adjusted his cuffs. He glanced once toward the benches, where Eleanor Gray sat in silence, her eyes red but resolute. The prosecutor began his address, laying out the evidence, the false diary, the second ledger, the transfers to non-existent charities. But when the true diary was presented, the courtroom fell into a hush. This, the prosecutor said, is Margaret Gray's final testimony, written by her own hand. In these pages, she names Charles Dunning as the man who deceived her, confined her, and ultimately ensured her death. Dunning's lawyer objected, but his voice trembled. The judge allowed the diary to be read. The words echoed through the room, quiet, human, devastating. Hastings watched as Dunning's expression cracked. His eyes darted toward Poirot, filled not with hatred, but disbelief, as if he still could not understand how the truth had found him. When the session adjourned, Poirot remained seated long after the others had left. The sunlight, weak and pale, fell across the wooden floor in slow patterns. Hastings turned to him. You've done it, Poirot. He'll be convicted. Margaret will have justice. Poirot's eyes did not move. Justice, yes, but there is still something missing. Hastings frowned. Missing? We have everything. The diary, the proof. Poirot interrupted gently. Proof is not the same as understanding. A lie can be destroyed, but it is not truly defeated until we know why it was told. He rose slowly. There is one more visit I must make, to hear the final confession. That evening, Poirot walked through the prison gates. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the narrow corridor until he reached the cell where Dunning awaited sentencing. The banker sat alone, his posture rigid, his face pale. He did not look up when the door opened. Poirot took a seat opposite him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Dunning said quietly, You must be very proud, Poirot. Pride. Poirot repeated, No, there is little pride in uncovering a tragedy. Dunning gave a hollow laugh. You think I killed her out of greed. You think I'm a monster. Poirot's voice was calm. No, Mr. Dunning. I think you are a man who lost control of his own lives. That is a tragedy greater than any greed. Dunning looked up sharply. She was going to ruin me. Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone. I couldn't let that happen. Poirot studied him. And yet you let her die. You killed the one person who loved you, to protect illusions that are now dust. Dunning's hands clenched. You don't understand. She wasn't supposed to die. I only meant to frighten her, to take the diary, to make her stop. But she fought back. She fell. It was an accident. Poirot nodded slowly. Then why forge her suicide note? Why create the diary that lied? Dunning's voice faltered. Because I was ashamed. Because I couldn't bear to see my name in the papers as a murderer. Because, even in death, I needed her to love me. Poirot leaned back, his expression unreadable. You wished her to forgive you, even as you erased her truth. Dunning's eyes glistened. I wanted to believe she would understand. That if I wrote her words the way I wanted them to sound, it would make it true. There was a long silence. Poirot finally stood. You wrote the words of forgiveness, Mr. Dunning, but you forgot that lies, no matter how tender, will always betray their author. Dunning lowered his head. It doesn't matter now. I see her face every night. I hear her voice when the lights go out. Poirot regarded him for a moment, then turned toward the door. Perhaps that is your punishment, to hear her truth forever, even when the world moves on. He paused before leaving. The diary that lied has burned now, but what remains is what you could never destroy. And then he was gone. 2 days later, the verdict was read, guilty. The court sentenced Charles Dunning to life imprisonment for the murder of Margaret Gray. Eleanor wept quietly as the judge's words echoed through the hall. Poirot stood nearby, his hands folded, his expression solemn. The weight of the case, of every deceit, every page, settled like dust upon his shoulders. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor approached him. It's over, she said softly. Poirot shook his head. No, Miss Gray. The case is over, but grief never ends so neatly. She smiled through her tears. Margaret always said truth would set her free. I think it finally has. Poirot looked at her kindly. Yes, but has also freed him in its own way. He now sees himself as he truly is. Few punishments are greater than that. They stepped outside. The winter wind was biting, but the sky was clear. Across the city, the chimneys of London exhaled thin plumes of smoke into the pale blue, like sighs from a world learning to breathe again. That night, Poirot sat alone in his flat. The fire burned low. The true diary lay open on his desk, the ink fading softly in the glow of the flames. He read one final passage, one that had been overlooked until now, a small note written in the margin of the last page. To anyone who finds this, truth is never lost. It only waits for courage to speak it. Poirot closed the book gently, as though tucking his soul to rest. Yes, he whispered, and courage was your greatest gift, Miss Gray. He placed the diary into the fireplace. The pages curled and blackened, the ink dissolving into smoke. But before the flames consumed it completely, one last ember flared, a single line still visible amid the ash. I forgive him. Poirot watched as it vanished into light. Forgiveness, he said softly. Even now. Hastings entered quietly. I didn't think you'd burn it, old chap. That was evidence. Poirot smiled faintly. It has served its purpose. The law has spoken, and truth no longer needs paper to survive. He looked into the fire. Sometimes, Hastings, we must let go of the proof, so that memory can take its rightful place. Hastings sank into the chair beside him. You think Margaret would have wanted this? Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, she wanted peace, not revenge. Justice is for the living. Peace is for the dead. For a while, the two men sat in silence. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet victory that had taken place within these walls. Poirot finally rose, walking to the window. The reflection of the flames shimmered faintly in the glass, like words half written and half erased. He turned back to Hastings. Do you know what I find most curious, my friend? Hastings shook his head. What's that? Poirot smiled gently. That a single lie, written with such care, could bring about the truth. In destroying her words, He revealed his soul. In trying to control her story, he gave it back to her. He looked once more into the night. That is the irony of deceit. It always betrays its creator. Hastings sighed. And yet, you still seem sad. Poirot's eyes softened. Because every victory of truth is also a loss of innocence. And innocence, Hastings, once lost, never returns. The clock struck midnight. Poirot extinguished the lamp and stood for a moment in the quiet room. On the mantelpiece, the faint scent of burned paper lingered, not unpleasant, but final, like the closing of a book. He whispered to the empty air, "Sleep well, Miss Gray. Your voice will be remembered." And then, for the first time in many nights, he allowed himself to rest. Epilogue. Weeks later, Hastings found Poirot sitting by the window, reading a letter. It was from Eleanor Gray. "Mr. Poirot, the house feels different now. I've opened all the windows, let the light in. I wanted you to know I'm leaving London. Somewhere quiet, near the sea. Margaret always loved the sea. Thank you for giving her back to me. Yours truly, Eleanor." Poirot folded the letter carefully. "Ah, Hastings, it is a good thing, is it not, to see peace return?" Hastings smiled. "It is, though I'll admit I'll miss the chase." Poirot chuckled softly. "And I, perhaps, will miss the mystery, but not the sorrow." He stood, straightening his tie. "Come, Hastings. Let's have lunch. The world, as always, must go on." As they stepped out into the street, the winter sun broke through the clouds, catching on the cobblestones like tiny mirrors. Poirot paused for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Hastings frowned. "Hear what?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Nothing. Silence. And in that silence, my friend, the truth res." And so ends another mystery unraveled by the brilliance of Hercule Poirot, a tale where lies tried to bury the truth, but the truth, as always, found its voice. If you enjoyed The Diary That Lied, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping Poirot mysteries. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there are many more secrets yet to be uncovered. Until next time, keep your mind sharp and your tea warm.